Star Wars is many things: science fiction, action adventure, spy thriller, romance, buddy comedy, and even mystery. But horror? Well, that seems like a stretch. When you watch X-Wings and TIE fighters whirl past each other, you're not thinking, boy, this sure is scary. The aliens may look a bit freaky, but that's because they're aliens. Even the villains, however warped and deformed they seem to be, did not strike me as horror villains. Ever since I saw Empire Strikes Back in 1998, it never crossed my mind that it was anything other than a kick-ass science fiction flick. I mean, sure, Emperor Palpatine exuded evil vibes, but it wasn't anything like Dracula or the Devil or what have you. He was evil like Marvel Comics or DC Comics evil. He was menacing, but there was a bit of campiness around him. His give in to the hate speech is parodied, and at times there's a clownish look to that pale face. Several years later, I was watching The Phantom Menace, and I was watching the fight scene between Qui-Gon Jinn and Darth Maul. My mom happened to walk by and asked, "Why are you watching a demon?" I was struck by the question because it came out of left field. Darth Maul just looked like that because he was a Sith, and the Sith are evil. It was a simplistic view of the Star Wars universe and nothing more. But, as with anything, it festered in my mind. Darth Maul was unusual because he looked familiar. He looked like something taken from a medieval manuscript and transplanted to the big screen. Darth Maul did not look like an alien. The thought never really went away, and it didn't rear its ugly head again until I watched an episode of The Mandalorian where one of the aliens clearly looked like a demon. He was red-skinned and had horns and all. The old thoughts flooded back into my mind, and I remembered just how familiar these faces were. And it got me thinking, are there elements of the Gothic in the Star Wars universe? More than that, can we look at the three trilogies through a Gothic lens? In this three-part series, we're going to take a look at each of the trilogies and explore the unique Gothic elements within each one. As we go through each trilogy, we'll explore the themes, the characters, the locations, and atmosphere, and see how they can be viewed from a completely different perspective. Now, we're not trying to change your perception of Star Wars whatsoever. I mean, you can still watch A New Hope as before, yet look for elements that could fit in a Gothic perspective as much as science fiction or action. By doing so, we hope to enrich your viewing experience and start a discussion about new ways of understanding not only this franchise, but many others. Many others. So, what is Gothic? Before we begin our discussion, we need to define what is Gothic. After all, if I'm speaking about Gothic elements within the Star Wars films and the universe in which the movies exist, it only makes sense to define what we mean. The Gothic genre is one that we can easily define visually. I mean, whether it's a Tim Burton film, a Dracula or Frankenstein movie produced by Universal or Hammer, a horror story set in Victorian times, or the architecture that dominated medieval Europe. We know it when we see it, but how can we describe it? Well, it is dark, moody, evoking a sense of unease, a supernatural dread that pervades the scenery, and even when all is resolved, there are a lot of elements that have yet to, or will never be revealed. But we need to get into the weeds a bit. We must look at what makes Gothic, well, Gothic. Merriam-Webster gives us a definition of or relating to a style of fiction characterized by the use of desolate or remote settings and macabre, mysterious, or violent incidents. To add even more, decay is the theme, and to enhance the state of decay, Gothic stories are set in ruined castles and abbeys, all built in the Gothic style, evoking a period that has long since passed, days now forgotten. Romance isn't the key, but rather morality plays enacted to make sense of the conflicting emotions raging within the human psyche. Humanity is locked in combat with unnatural forces of evil within a setting that is hostile and bleak. When we look at the Star Wars movies, it very much fits the bill. I mean, whether it's Hoth or Tatooine or the Death Star, these are inhospitable places that do not foster life naturally, but arenas where individuals must enact whatever means necessary in order to live semi-comfortably lives. Furthermore, there is a prevalent sense of unease, isolation, and tension, played out psychologically and physically. And we cannot ignore the presence of the supernatural, since that too plays a tremendous role in how the course of the story runs. There is also a state of persecution and imprisonment, which we get in spades with the Empire pursuing the Rebel Alliance, doing it with abandon and murderous giddiness. The Fair Maiden is also a stock character in Gothic fiction when imprisoned by the villain, or often imprisoned by the villain. The first movie of the franchise, A New Hope, we find Princess Leia trying to escape Darth Vader, only to be captured and interrogated on the location of her rebel compatriots. When she refuses to comply, Alderaan is shattered with a destructive power that seems godlike, a misuse of scientific endeavor that destroys, not fosters life. It's an inverse of the Genesis wave from Star Trek that creates desolation, another theme that prevails throughout Gothic fiction. I mean, Gothic fiction and horror is stocked with other colorful characters, from the young and noble hero, holy men, thugs and ne'er-do-wells, ghosts, demons, and supernatural creatures who navigate our reality and make contact with humans, either for beneficence or, more likely, for malevolent purposes. And then, the big one germane to this video is the discovery of unrevealed family ties and inheritance. The hero discovers something shocking about their lineage that was previously unknown, either purposefully or accidentally. Of course, the revelation that Vader is indeed Anakin Skywalker, the father of Luke, certainly fits. And it leads to a moral quandary that plagues Luke. Will he too succumb to the darkness? If his father, the best of the Jedi, could be so easily corrupted, then would he, a mere ingenue, not succumb even faster? The ancient prophecy motif also looms large, along with visions and portents that influence the characters in the course of the narrative. Throughout the trilogy, Luke is influenced and guided by visions, sometimes to his benefit, more to his disadvantage, especially in Empire Strikes Back, where he ends up losing a hand. The characters in the setting are struggling with a tyrannical villain who personifies the moral conflict that rages within their minds. Is Han Solo just a scoundrel, or can he really be a force for good? Is Vader truly given to evil, or can he be redeemed? Is Luke truly the paragon of virtue, or can he become the Emperor's new apprentice? All these are questions that arise throughout the movies, and would not be too out of place in a novel by Walpole, Shelley, or Radcliffe. So, with that out of the way, with our definition of Gothic laid out and examples given to mark out the path in this video, let us finally dive in with full gusto. We will certainly take certain elements of the Gothic and apply them to aspects of the Star Wars movies, primarily the original trilogy, and highlight how Lucas's imagery and scenery exemplify the traditional Gothic tropes. And even in the 20th century, in a galaxy far, far away, we still cannot escape the unease and tension that 18th and 19th century writers were employing on the pages. The Galactic Empire on the surface is meant to symbolize order, but there's a sense of unease because it's an unnatural order. It's order imposed by an authoritarian regime based on fear. When A New Hope was released in 1977, many of the elements in the Galactic Empire would have been familiar to the audience. In fact, George Lucas was counting on it. Darth Vader, the stormtroopers, the imposing ships and edifices, and the Emperor were all visual allusions to a trauma that was still fresh. The generation that came of age in 1977 were the children of those who fought in World War II and witnessed the horrors of war in Europe. The helmets were not too subtle digs at the Wehrmacht. The Death Star and Star Destroyers were imposing as fascism, and the Emperor himself was a grisly pastiche of the would-be Emperor, the man who once swore his Reich would last 1,000 years, who once stood amid the sea of stormtroopers with cheers erupting to the heavens, who now died in a bunker as the city crumbled all around. The starkness of color stands out as well. Red, black, and white, tearing down the natural world into three shades that, well, very well represent war, death, and pestilence. Anywhere the Imperial Army goes, they leave destruction in its wake, carrying with them these three gifts. The vastness of their ranks is meant to make you feel small. Their ships, designed to tear apart worlds in mere seconds, serve to deter disorder. What the world witnessed in World War II had been magnified to planetary proportions in A New Hope to show just how destructive authoritarianism was and how, at all costs, must be suppressed and never allowed to resurrect from the ashes. It was as much a cautionary tale as it was a metaphor. After all, most of Europe was living under the thumb of the Nazis, intimidated into accepting their world order in exchange for material gain. Perhaps we won't come after you, they said, but there's always a chance that generosity could be rescinded. The anxiousness, the constant paranoia, the desperation, the fear never went away. Even in the 1970s, half the world was still experiencing these emotions. I mean, not under fascism, but under communism and socialism. Regimes who very much stole from the fascist playbook and carried it out without pause. Lucas surely would have tapped into the zeitgeist in order to show just how oppressive the Galactic Empire was. Ostensibly force for good, it was anything but. A rebellion, however, was the antithesis and defined itself as such. After all, if the Empire was entirely evil to its core, then it would make sense for the rebellion to receive support, both on and off screen, legitimize their coup d'etat so that something else can take over. Still, it would be a long and arduous project, as the imperial government had the resources and capital to prolong the fight for as long as need be. They were continually pursued and persecuted along the way, hounded with the aim of complete annihilation. The Empire then lived up to its Gothic expectations of a villain, even capturing fair maidens with the intent of extracting information to further persecution. The military-industrial complex within the Empire would make any would-be dictator envious. The destroyers, cruisers, and fighters loom as monsters, roaming the emptiness of space as the leviathans of old. They were foreboding structures. The writers of the 19th century set their stories amid crumbling Gothic structures that were dark, imposing in tombs to shield shameful secrets. Indeed, Gothic architecture best suited their narratives because they were relics of a bygone era, a time whose beliefs were alien. In the Empire, the Imperial fleet accomplishes the same goal, giving us a sense of dread wherever they appeared. Just as with the crumbling Gothic abbeys and cathedrals, they too were foreboding, bearing a sense of dread as they moved with purpose. And that's what makes them far more menacing than any old church. And at least then, the churches were originally built for a nobler purpose, centers for communities to congregate. They had only begun to decay when the social norms that once tied people broke down. The fleet, however, with its titanic ships, were never intended for any other purpose but war and oppression. These were instruments of war, quite terrible in sight and sound. I can imagine if they appeared in the imagination of a romantic poet or painter, they would attempt to make sense of these monstrosities and see them as they are. They may even surpass the decaying churches and castles in dread and invoke a new type of fear. Even the TIE fighters, when they charge into battle, scream in an unsettling manner as banshees wailing on a lonely Irish moor. Whenever you hear them on screen, they send a chill down your spine. Ships aren't supposed to sound like that. They're meant to be smooth. They don't wail as ghosts, and still they do, because even the inanimate objects of the Empire are not normal. And that is the point. These aren't assurances, but weapons of fear. These are monstrosities that violate the natural order, acting as instruments to subvert the natural order and impose its own sense of order. Yet it's a perverted form of order. It's parasitic. It's taking over a world, extracting its resources, exploiting the local population, and then leave once everything has been exhausted. On to the next one. The parasitic nature of the Empire on its subjects is itself a terrifying prospect. If we can use the Gothic vocabulary, the Empire is vampiric in nature, draining dry the life of a world, turning them into dead husks. An entire galaxy, then, is a larder. Even fleets of destroyers resemble fangs, chomping at the bits, eager to feast. They are monstrosities filled with crews, blood cells in red, black, and white, continuously feeding it, directing it to another unsuspecting planet. At any point, death could visit a world and render it lifeless. I mean, what happened to Alderaan, really, could have been seen as an act of mercy when compared to Mandalore. This isn't Plato's idealized kingdom ruled by a philosopher king. This is a perversion of what a state ought to be, or rather a mirror to reflect what was seen only 30 years ago, as well as what was happening now in Cambodia, Vietnam, the Soviet Union, and other countries undergoing political turmoil. It also reflected a possibility for the future. Could the free world find itself on a similar path? Would we ever find ourselves existing as cogs in a devilish machine of the state? Would we even realize it, or simply learn to accept it for an imitation of peace? What would it take? What kind of fear would be invoked to make that possibility a reality? A more frightful question to ask is, are we already living in such a state? Emperors traditionally have always been portrayed as strong, virulent, dignified, militaristic, and controlling. From the busts of the Romans to the Renaissance to modern photographs, they all strike a similar pose. They all bear the same posture and exude the same air. These men were the state, and so long as they remained, so too would the state. Take this painting of Charles V, for instance. Charles held vast swathes of territory from the North Sea to the Mediterranean, from the Moselle to the Danube. Bedecked in gilded armor, striding on a majestic steed, this is a man prepared to jump into action at a moment's notice. You would never know that his lower jaw gave him quite a lot of difficulty and that he was suffering from numerous ailments which would only get worse with age. But here, you don't get that sense. This isn't Charles the man. This is Charles the Emperor, a man appointed by God himself. Emperors did not grow old, get sick, become frail, or were indecisive. These were propaganda pieces disseminated throughout the realm, placed for the public to see, so they knew that the emperor was not merely a man, but the state itself. Obedience to the emperor was loyalty to the fatherland, and the fatherland, in persona imperatore, was strong and eternal. But Palpatine is different. He isn't the specimen that you would follow in the battle or willingly die for. I mean, in fact, he's hideous. This is a walking corpse draped in a black shroud, and yet death is on full display. He is a state, all right, a state of death. Palpatine is the heart of this galactic vampire that feeds constantly, bringing about death so death itself can continue to exist. An oxymoron. The Empire allows death to sit at its very heart and administer it. Why? Why give us a leader who belongs in a tomb, not a palace? The answer is that the Empire is not what it seems. It appears as a whitewashed edifice that beneath is filthy and corrupt. I mean, the Empire is, in a sense, a tomb. Those within the system have no way of escaping. It encloses around people and planets, and all it brings is death. Palpatine then embodies the corruptive nature of a political entity that is dying, and yet refuses to die. His gaunt and sickly pallor gives him a Nosferatu-like countenance. He is always on the brink of death, but never crossing the boundary. He lives, but not by natural means. Just as the Empire and the Emperor could be melded into a strange, singular entity, it seems for as long as the Empire feeds on the galaxy itself, so the Emperor lives. It's vampirism by proxy. there's also something demonic about the Emperor as well. It's the eyes. I mean, he's possessed, but it isn't involuntary. He has willingly submitted to the possession, what exorcists call perfect possession, when the individual's will is perfectly aligned with the demonic spirit. Palpatine, then, was never a victim, but a willing participant. He gave into his dark urges and let it fester. As a result, what we see now is a manifestation, of the evil within. I mean, it's reminiscent of how Regan McNeil went from being an innocent child to an ugly abomination thanks to the influence of Pazuzu. The power that he wields, both physically and figuratively, does not change him into a beautiful figure, but further corrupts his body. It's a horrific sight, really, and terrible to fathom. To lust for untold power at any cost could mean the price is anything. Palpatine, then, is the perfect monster, just as his empire is an extension of his persona. On the political level, he operates as the perfect autocrat whose aims are selfish, not altruistic. He abuses his power, and his functionaries carry out these orders without compunction. On the physical level, he appears as evil incarnate. I mean, he is Dracula, the Phantom, Satan, the Boogeyman, all rolled into one. To cap it all, he is draped in black robes, very much like the Grim Reaper. And it fits too because the Emperor brings only death in his wake. On the ethical level, he embodies traits that would give philosophers and psychologists a field day. He relishes in abusing others, demanding deference, gleefully carries out sadistic acts without a second thought, exhibiting antisocial behavior, manipulative, and narcissistic tendencies that would normally disqualify him from ever occupying political office. There's nothing sympathetic about this man, and the movies do not give you any grounds for siding with him. I mean, what better monster than for the rebellion to counter in their insurgency? A death-like autocrat who exhibits destructive behavior is the perfect foil for a diverse, altruistic, youthful cohort wishing to reshape the galaxy in its image. Palpatine, then, fits the ideal image of a monster because he elicits abhorrence on numerous levels, from the intellectual to the visceral. The aliens are normal to us. We've been conditioned to a certain aesthetic in our understanding of extraterrestrial life. We have a dense vocabulary for defining and describing what these creatures could be. However, if you were to talk to a medieval man and show him these aliens, their understanding would be far more limited. They would most likely view them as demons. This goes back to what I mentioned in the introduction. We can take the demonic-looking creatures and name them as aliens because our understanding of the world and the cosmos has shifted from the 1300s. We can easily look at a horned creature and plausibly see them as inhabitants of another world, as they are denizens of an alien plane of existence. In other words, monsters in hell and another world are the same, but can go by different names, depending on the times. Even creatures that may look familiar as supernatural creatures are given a different origin, name, and purpose. I mean, just in the canteen scene in A New Hope, we can spot some aliens that resemble werewolves, devils, and aquatic beasts. Even when set on different worlds, these supernatural creatures, embedded deep within our psyche, continue to make their presence known and manifest on screen. Even our understanding of alien worlds has changed. Throughout history, different cultures had different names for these planes of existence. I mean, the Vikings spoke of the Nine Realms and Yggdrasil. The Greeks spoke of Hades, Asphodel, and Elysium. Christianity divides, the afterlife into heaven and hell. And today we see them as exoplanets. Worlds that seem to exist within human imagination now exist beyond our reach. The worlds that we see in Star Wars are familiar yet foreign. Tatooine is very much like the Southwest, as Hoth is similar to Alaska in the dead of winter. And Dagobah is not too far removed from the Louisiana Bayou. Yet these are alien worlds. Yet these worlds are desolate arenas where the Empire and the Rebellion prepare to and slog it out. Even Endor, a name derived from the first book of Samuel where the witch summoned the spirit of Samuel, is deceptively calm. But it too undergoes a transformation where good and evil fight. In the vastness of its woods, it still feels lonely and desolate. And that may be the point. Even in a populated galaxy full of different alien species and civilizations, desolation is still abundant, because either by nature or design, these worlds have been rendered hostile to life. As we'll see in Episode 2, the Sith operate out of locations that are inhospitable and forbidding to life. Worlds where death seems the only course is inviting to evil. Star Wars occupies a unique space in science fiction because it melds the religious with the scientific. Other well-known franchises in the genre are very much wedded to one thing only: the scientific. All problems in the world or universe can be solved with technology. Take Star Trek, for instance. Gene Roddenberry had a distrust of religion and did not include it in episodes of the original series, although there were allusions here and there. In Doctor Who, the eponymous character famously voices his suspicion of religious practices and beliefs, going so far as to mock them, as in The Brain of Morbius or The Power of Kroll. The Terminator movies are focused primarily on mankind's seemingly futile war against machines, and God or the supernatural have no place in the conflict. But in Star Wars, there is a religious approach to understand the unseen world. In this case, the Force is a medium, an entity, an unseen force, that is wielded by sensitive individuals who choose to use it for good or evil, whom are designated Jedi or Sith. It is a rather strange prospect in science fiction, really. Religion and science coexisting. The Force is very much a mystery in the universe that only a few can comprehend, and yet those who wield its power are as much reliant and adept in using technology as everybody else. But is there something supernatural at play here? The Force is something that does things out of the ordinary. Yoda lifting Luke Skywalker's X-Wing out of the swamp, for instance, does show there is something greater at work than merely what is physical. Yoda could never conceivably lift that fighter all up by himself. Yet the Force is not a god. It's something that is acknowledged and reckoned with. And yet, it is sometimes spoken of as if it were an entity. The famous maxim, "May the Force be with you," is as common as saying, "God bless you." So, how is it that the Jedi remain physically normal and spiritually pure, and the Sith, in some cases, turned out deformed and twisted? Well, it comes down to a matter of choice. Those inclined to using the Force for personal gain will do just about anything to achieve the goal, even sacrificing aesthetics to become something greater. Those in service of the Sith find themselves relying more, not less, on technology. Darth Vader is a good example of someone who, through their choices and actions, must now rely on technology to sustain their daily well-being while being empowered by the Force. It is ironic, really, that those who are physically twisted as Palpatine or frail-looking as Yoda end up being the most adept. And then there are the Force ghosts, apparitions that appear to guide and counsel the protagonists. It is quite remarkable that ghosts, a seemingly archaic and superstitious relic, would find itself in the realm of science fiction. But as with the Force, Lucas isn't giving us a strict dichotomy where we must choose either pure technology or magic. He's melded the two together so that both can coexist, independently and yet informed of the other. What makes the Force ghosts fascinating is that they don't deny the possibility of an afterlife. Whereas other science fiction shows and movies reduce the concept of an afterlife to something technical, there was always something mystical, spiritual, and intangible in our everlasting quest to comprehend the existence of life after death. The Force ghosts confirm a belief that seems too religious and superstitious, but it doesn't deter. Rather, it attracts. It appeals to the inherent need for immortality on the level that modern science fiction cannot adequately or grotesquely answer. Whether it's placing brains in machines, downloading consciousness into new bodies, creating digital holograms, they are all doing the same thing. I mean, these are all exercises of reducing the soul to ones and zeros. These measures are not assuaging the need for answers about life after death, but turns into a process that divorces the spiritual aspect of these questions and turns them into something that is far more disturbing. A process that cheapens human existence to parts that can be interchangeably swapped. Force ghosts and the Force itself provide an alternative. Well, they apply familiar religious concepts into a framework that is palatable for audiences who may not be entirely sold on religion. In spite of everything that happens, the dignity of the body and the soul are affirmed and act as counterweights to the mechanization process of immortality, is what we see in Darth Vader. After all, what happened to Anakin Skywalker in his metamorphosis was unnatural. It stripped him of his dignity and reduced him into parts that could be removed and replaced with ease. It was a form of immortality that was off-putting. The poets and artists of the Romantic era saw what was happening in the world, the rapidity of the Industrial Revolution, changing the natural world and destroying its beauty, and reducing people to cogs in the ever-expanding machine. The poems, novels, and paintings of the era sought to capture the horror of the industrialization process and what it was doing to both nature and mankind. They wanted to show that progress of this kind was not as beneficial as it would seem. Their prophecy would come to fruition in 100 years when the continent would itself be embroiled in the First World War, utilizing the very industrial processes to devise machines and methods that exterminated people on a massive scale. Religion had to shift then from merely speaking of spiritual matters to serving as a counterweight to the excesses of industrialization, colonialism, and capitalism. The Force, the belief in it, and the ghosts undaunted served as a counterweight to the Empire. The industrialization of immortality and the production of life, either through subjugation or extermination. In both cases, the Romantics and the Jedi both advocate for return to the natural order and to oppose what they saw as an imposition of perversion by the industrialists and imperialists. Is Darth Vader truly evil? Could Luke Skywalker have truly joined the dark side? The original trilogy is a morality play that taps into the importance of choices. Luke Skywalker starts off as a naive young man searching for adventure. He's introduced to the rebellion and sees his role in fighting the Empire. However, in keeping with the Gothic, there's that unrevealed family connection that calls into question everything the protagonist believes and does. The revelation that Vader is his father would give him pause to think. Is it his fate to follow the same course? Does he allow external factors to determine his life? Luke is confronted with Palpatine and could succumb to his hatred and join him, but he refuses. In Empire Strikes Back, he has a premonition that his friends will suffer greatly if he does not intervene, and in the course, he ends up losing a hand, commencing the path his father took that slowly decreased his humanity, transforming him into something mechanical and menacing. As mentioned in the intro, the struggle between good and evil isn't merely a physical one, but psychological. The villains and heroes represent the duality within the human mind as we strive daily in our life choices. But if there is anything that truly represents not only the Gothic, but storytelling itself, it's the need to confront the conflicting interests, whether bent towards good or evil, and make a decision to resolve and lay to rest the conflict. Luke does it on his end, and in the process brings his father to resolution. Vader truly isn't evil, but responding to a trauma that was selfishly exploited by Palpatine. In the end, the Skywalker family bury the malevolence that once plagued and tore apart their unit, but acknowledge that it came at a price. The original trilogy laid the foundation for a franchise that has now garnered billions of dollars and has become a pop culture sensation. It is the triumphal story of good over evil, a theme that goes back to the dawn of storytelling. But there are elements within that borrow from the Gothic to amplify the characters and settings. The mistake we make is to demarcate these genres and put them in separate categories. The Gothic, as part of horror, cannot possibly influence or find its place in science fiction, let alone something as iconic as Star Wars. But then we make the mistake of ignoring visual and the thematic cues that are in abundance throughout the three movies, and that robs us the opportunity to further appreciate what the films and filmmakers are doing in order to tell a comprehensive story. That isn't to say that we should change our previous conception and now simply view Star Wars as horror. Sure, limbs get chopped off, they're aliens that look monstrous, and the Emperor looks like living death. But there are elements of horror interwoven into the narrative that heighten the tension and enhance the story. The dualistic paradigm, one of good versus evil, situates our attention so that we know who is the hero and who is the villain. The Empire is a monolithic state that uses various instruments of fear, creates a credible foil for the rebellion. After all, if the Empire was seen doing a modicum of good, it would seem a little awkward to root for their destruction. The Empire must be, for all its facets, corrupt and evil, from the head of state down to the lowliest stormtrooper. The rebellion, on the other hand, represents a diverse society that is symbiotic, not parasitic, and represents the best alternative. But we would do well to remember what I outlined in the intro about the similarities between Star Wars and the characteristics of Gothic fiction. There is no demarcation but a blending, where one is nearly indistinguishable from the other. And when we add that element into the mix, and when we begin viewing these movies from another perspective, we appreciate the value of an already developed franchise.